Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Auto-transposable music system through all 12 collections of 7 notes, automatically rotatable to all 7 modal perspectives. Part number 14. So get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin', and you need Microsoft Excel if you want to excel. Yes, even excel at rockin'. And Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay, because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just follow along, possibly building the part of the worksheet we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below, including a very colorful fretboard tab we may refer to, the example tab, in essence the answer key, the practice tab having pre-formatted cells so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you do not have any of that, that's okay, because we'll continue to work in the blank tab where we started from scratch with a blank worksheet, continuing in essence in the blank part of the worksheet, practicing not only our music skills but our Excel formatting skills as well, for formatting's sake. Quick recap of what we have done thus far, what we will be doing this time, hopefully finishing up this time with this project. We want to be building a worksheet where we can jot down our musical ideas, our songs, our tunes, our melodies in a way as efficiently as possible. Concepts which can apply even to writing these things out by hand, so that we can automatically transpose them to all 12 collections of 7 notes and possibly even rotate them to all 7 modal perspectives from all 12 collections of notes, changing the tonic upon rotation. So we also think that the MIDI system and DAW systems should have this capability, which allows us a lot more tinkering and maneuvering, which I believe should be the case for a modern day DAW, baby. They need to update it, so get to it if any programmers are out there. So we have the backbone of the MIDI system, basically numbering system. We have then the notes. We have the human being numbering system, 1 through 12 for local distance. The letters here for our numbers in the musical alphabet. We then want a relative perspective using, in essence, Nashville numbers, basically absolute or non-changeable modal points, which we can also represent by letter. And then we mapped out our chords, noting that the normal chord naming convention has to have a nodal point, but we want to represent everything from a relative perspective, building chords off of the 7 notes in the collection. Could we still build chords off of notes outside of that collection? We sure can, but we want the stock chords that could be automatically generated without stacking notes available to us for the most likely chords we're going to build, which are those off of the 7 nodal points in whatever collection of notes we're working on. We can then remove the note and just give us the relative position using a naming construction, like just a 3-note Lydian chord, a 4-note Mixolydian chord, and so on and so forth. By doing that, we can then actually map out the entire chord much more specifically by giving relative Nashville nodal positions, which we could adjust upward so that we can easily rotate them through the modal perspectives as we rotate and turn the 2 dials that we can turn, modal perspective and the collections of notes. We then have our 12 collections of notes, and we're looking at them from a relative perspective, from a Nashville number perspective. There's 7 notes in the Nashville numbers, but we're going to put the 0.5s for the notes in between so that we can still represent the 5 notes outside of the collection, but from the same perspective. By looking at it this way, that's what gives us the 2 dials, the things that we can shift against each other so that we can easily have our rotation between the 12 collections of notes. And so then we can then write our musical information kind of like sheet music, modern day sheet music or tablature, so that instead of stacking all of our notes, we can possibly have 1 row dedicated to 1 octave of information. And I would like that row to have a 12 note range, 1 octave up, and therefore the row itself is going to be defined by the lowest note in that row which will typically be, if it's C major, it would be middle C. If it was going to be G major, it would be the G, 12 up from there. If it was G mixolydian, it would still be the G, and we're thinking about 12 notes up from the G. Then, instead of mapping out the notes with note names, which we could do, it would be easier to map them out by the Nashville numbers, possibly using a MIDI system like a 10 key, like you would on a computer, because this isn't a piano, this is a computer. So you might just map it out with a 10 key, and you can actually write music with the musical instrument of the computer and map that out. And you can possibly build your chords then, having the root or lowest point of the chord within the 12-note range here. If you do that, we can then expand it or change it to a normal naming convention, which then locks us into one 12-note collection, which could then be easily rotated to any 12-note collection by changing this to a 12 or an 11 for G, and that should change this. Now, these need to be adjusted. That's what we'll do this time. And that gives us the one dial to turn so that we can write it this way, and then we can change the 12-note perspective. We can also then map that out into a MIDI perspective, which is the note stacking perspective. So a modern day DAW should be able to represent it this way, compact, and this way, if you just tell the system what the perspective is that you're viewing the song in, which collection of notes, what is the modal point, what's the tonic, and then we can represent it this way, and so on and so forth. Now notice, you could have a more complex song that possibly you want to say, I want to look at part of the song from the perspective of C major and another part of the song from the perspective of a D Dorian or some other collection of notes. Well, you should be able to do that, right? I should be able to look at this part of the song and say, this is the perspective of that song part, and then this part, maybe that would be the perspective from a different perspective as I'm running through possibly the modes from a jazz perspective. That would be great, because then I could then again rotate each of these perspectives to the 12 collections of notes, as well as to the relative modal perspectives individually or all at once, rotating them all one up, right? So that would be, again, I think a sophisticated DAW system should have that capacity, because it would increase the level of tinkering exponential, like huge, right, increase. Okay, let's put this back to a 4, and then down below we have the modal shifts that we talked about. So now I can rotate it modally, shifting from, if it was an Ionian perspective to a Dorian perspective, all of these chords shifted up and all of the relative positions shifted up, and so on. So then we went all the way down with all the modes. So that gives us our 2 dials that we can work on. All right, so now what we left off with is that if I think about writing it this way without referencing a collection of notes, but looking at a relative perspective so that it can then be assigned to any collection of notes, that would be the optimal way to write your music, even if you're writing it by hand. And then I can transpose that to this system where I actually assign a collection of notes. In this case, I imagined that I wrote it in Ionian mode, or the 7-note collection around the key of C, and now I'm in the 7-note collection of the Ionian, and now I'm going to assign it the tonic to be the C major. So right, so now so now the C is now the tonic, and it's going to be the C major 7-note collection. All right, so we did that before, and we came up with this formula that worked. But the problem with this formula is I had to use this reference, which is applying to these cells over here. And we kind of cheated. I kind of cheated because I wanted this to represent this column. But if I put a column into the formula, that became complicated for the formula to return the column. So what we did instead is said, return what is in this cell, and this cell is the range of this column. So that means if I change this to a C or any of the other ranges, then this cell reference changes and this cell reference is in the formula. The problem with that, however, is that it's not dynamic. This cell reference is hard-coded. I think there might be a way to make it dynamic, but I'm not going to get into that in detail. I don't want to, it's not really worth it. I can kind of fix it here. Meaning when I added these cells in front of it, it pushed these cells to the right, which means that these cell references are no longer proper, because it shouldn't be AP15 to AP26. It should be CL15 to 26. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to manually fix these columns, which should fix this formula so that these will then be properly allocated, showing the notes, and then see how we can transpose this or copy this down from the Ionian to all of the other modal perspectives. What do we have to do to copy that down? So let's do that one at a time. I'm going to go over here and say, all right, let's just adjust these. I'm just going to double click in here, and I want to say this needs to be changed to CL and CL tab. I'm going to say F2 to go into the cell, and then this needs to be, I'll caps lock it CL, and this needs to be CL tab F2, and this needs to be CL, wait a sec, no, hold on. This one, CL, this needs to be CM. CM, CM. And this one needs to be F2, CN. CN and CN. Tab F2. This one needs to be CO and CO. And this one, F2, needs to be why is this, something looks wrong here. This needs to be it should be going to CO26. So I don't know why this has a 13 in here. Let's get rid of that 13. This should be CP26 and CP tab F2. This should be CQ and CQ tab F2. This should be CR and CR tab F2. This needs to be CS and CS tab F2. This needs to be CT and CT tab F2. And this needs to be CU and CU tab F2. This needs to be CV and CV tab, and this needs to be finally CW and CW. So now that should pull over and fix this problem. So now I'm in a 6, which is a D. So this formula has changed automatically, and then that's being used in this row, so that now I have the collection of notes being represented from the D Ionian perspective. So the collection of notes for D Ionian. If I change this to a 4, then you've got the C. If I change this to an 11, you've got the G collection of notes for the G. So up here, these are all the same. No change here, because this is representing the relative positions for any collection of notes, which is the best way to write it, because then you can just say, hey, look, this is the relative position of the song, and then I'm going to assign it to be played in the collection of notes around the C major, and the Ionian is the tonic, right? The C is the tonic in that case. So, and this will represent it. So this, when you write it this way, it locks it in to being in whatever key. So in this case, it's in the key of G. If I want to transpose it to another key, then notice what I have to do when I change this to like a D Ionian. I have to transpose all the letters. Now, on a guitar, you don't need to do that, because on a guitar, you could just shift all the shapes up, right? So you could just, if you assign it by relative position, then the transposition becomes easy. You don't have to rewrite the song. You just tell them that it's in a different tonic. You just write it this way and say, okay, now I'm going to say it's in the 7-note collection around the key of C major, and then you can assign a tonic that could be other than C major, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's go down and let's bring this back to a 4 and say, let's try to copy this bit. This is now correct. So let's go format paint this here and copy this bit down to the Dorian. So Dorian right here, if I paste it, something's wrong. So let's go F, or let's check the range. So now this is picking it up. I put it in the wrong spot. That's why that's going to be a problem. Let's go ahead and delete that and try it again. I need to put it on the bottom. Let's copy this. It needs to be on the bottom of the orange. Let's put it on the bottom. Boom. All right. And then it looks like it's picking up pretty much what we want. Let's check it. So this is it's picking up the Dorian. That's right. Relative correct. It's still going to be picking up this collection of notes, which is correct because I'm looking at the relative position of the same collection of notes. So in a DAW system, you should be able to write the song like in the Dorian mode, meaning I would tell the system, I want to write this in Dorian, which you can write this way, or you can use this method, meaning that would be the same collection of notes of the relative major. So I would think the easiest way to name what you're playing in is to say, I'm going to tell you the collection of notes based on the major collection, meaning it's the collection of notes around C major, and then I'm going to tell you what the tonic is. The tonic is the Dorian, which in this case is the D. So right, and if you were in a DAW, you should be able to play in this from this perspective, where the D would be the lowest note, and the DAW should be able to then rotate the 2 dials to allow you to play in all 12 collections of Dorian, as well as rotate the dial to all 7 modal collections, including rotate from the Dorian back to the Ionian. So notice in Excel, I'm writing this from one perspective, like Ionian, and then the Ionian dial turns to all the modal perspectives. But if you were to map this onto a database, then of course the idea would be you can write in any of them and they should all be connected. So I can write the song in Ionian, I can write the song in Dorian or Phrygian or whatever, and then I should be able to turn the dials, which would be to transpose the song to all 12 collections of whatever mode I'm in, or to rotate the modal perspective. Okay. So I think that mapped out all correctly, and we're still using this collection of notes. So if I'm in D Dorian, then you can see what's happening here is we're still pulling from the same collection of notes. We're still pulling from the same collection of notes, which is assigned here, which is based off of the C, which is here, right? So we're still on this collection of notes, even though we're looking at the tonic as this D. Now note that I'm looking at this collection of notes. If I think of it as a circle, like going around a clock, then it's the same collection of notes. But if I start on the D and I take into consideration the octave, the thing that gets a little wonky is that you would like the D to be the lowest note for D Dorian, and then be going up from there pitch-wise. So that's what gets a little bit wonky when you're mapping this information out, because you do have that octave situation. So it's the same 12 notes, but if I start on the D, you would think it would be from a normal naming convention D4 and going up 12 notes in pitch from there, which means that these 2 notes are going to be higher in pitch. Okay, but that's the general idea. All right, and then so it looks like that's mapping out fine. So I think I can copy that and put it here, paste formulas, and I get the same thing because that's our test field. And I can paste it here, and I can paste it here, and I can paste it here, formulas only. And then I can paste it down to the Phrygian. So if I'm on the Phrygian, I paste it down here, boom. And so now it's in Phrygian is E Phrygian. So again, I should be able to write the song in the E Phrygian. This is E Phrygian. I would think this would be a... Why does this come up with an F minor here? I think that would be an E Phrygian. What is happening here? Let's see, where's this coming from? This is picking up that Phrygian, and it's looking at it in that collection of notes. It's pulling in it here. And so I would think that it would be on here looking at E Phrygian right there. So let's see what is happening. Okay, I see what happened. It's not this formula that's the problem. If I find this, it's actually just a hard-coded issue over here, because if I go over here, it's looking for this one in here, which is the Phrygian, but in here I said it was an F, and that is wrong. So I need, it's this cell that is wrong, because this is pointing to that number, and that is incorrect. So let me fix that. Okay, so I'm just going to go into here. I'm going to say this needs to be tied out here, so it should be, this should be the E. Let's pull an E up at the top, so that it should copy down when I copy it down. So I'm going to pull in, I guess it doesn't matter which one I do, but let's do that one. I'll say it's the E, and then I'm going to F2 in here, and then go to this one, which is currently pointing to an F. I guess it doesn't matter. Let's just go to that E right there. It should be that E, and then F2 going into it, and then that needs to be an E, not an F. Enter F2, and then I'm going to fix the formulae. That needs to be an E, not an F. Enter F2, and then this once again needs to be an E, not an F. All right. So I think that, and these automatically change based on this key, which is the yellow cell over here. So if I change this to an 11, boom, this whole thing, the collection of notes, changes automatically. So now I've got all of these so now the 1, or the Ionian, is the G, and down here then that would be a B for the Phrygian. Okay, so I think that's good. Let's bring this back on over to the C, which we're most comfortable with. Collection of notes around the C major, and continue the copying down. Copy it down. Copy it down. So this looks correct now, I think. So let's copy that, and then I'll paste it here. Formulae, and formulae, and formulae. Let's go to the next one, the Lydian. Lydian also, we'll just paste it right there. Boom. That should be the F Lydian. That's correct this time. So it looks good. All right, so now we've rotated it around to the F Lydian and have assigned the relative F Lydian using the same collection of notes, but now we're going to say the tonic is F Lydian, and the F now is going to be the lowest note in the collection of notes as we start in this middle area, would be the general idea. Right, so it's going to be the F major. So yeah, this F is going to be the lowest note in the collection of notes, and then we go up from there, and so we can see that. All right, let's copy that, and then we're going to go down and say, let's paste it to the mixolid. Paste formulae, paste formulae, paste formulae, paste formulae. So same collection of notes, but now we're going to say that the G is the tonic G, but we are going to say that the G now is going to be the lowest note in the collection of notes. So when I pull it over here, what's happening is the C was down here. We renamed the column, the rows, but you could think of it as the whole thing is being shifted up as we have our new tonic is shifting up. So it's the same collection of notes if you think of it as though like we're going around in a circle like a clock. But when you take the octave into consideration, the G is going to be the lowest note. So if you're in a DAW system and you wanted to enter the information in a DAW format, and you're like, okay, look, I'm going to be entering the data in this tablature. I'm going to assign it as the collection of notes around the mixolydian. And I'm going to say that it's going to be G mixolydian, meaning the collection of notes would be C major, but I'm going to be having the tonic of the mixolydian, which is the related G mixolydian. So that would mean that in this area, we want the G to be the lowest note, and everything after the G is going to be higher in pitch, right? So, and it's still the same collection of notes. It's just that. So that means that when I play an A, if I'm entering this into the system, this middle area is being represented as the G is the lowest note, and then we go up one octave from there in this orange area. So the G is the lowest note. When I go to the A, that's going to be higher in pitch than the G, right? And so on and so forth. So I think that's the most efficient way to see it. If we want to look at it by letter, it would be easier actually to look at it by relative number. Nashville number 5 is now going to be the lowest pitched number. So I can play it in G or any, like I can assign it to a G, but I can play it in any of the 12 collection of notes for the G mixolydian. I just want to note that as I enter it in just with my 10 key, as I'm playing my DAW instrument, which is a computer using a typewriter keyboard or a 10 key numbers, then I can say that it's going to be 5 is going to be the lowest note. And as I go to a 6, then it's going to be higher. It's going to be higher in pitch. 7 is going to be higher in pitch. And when I get to a 1, then it's also going to be higher in pitch as I look at the distance from the perspective of the mixolydian. So I'm not going to renumber it. I'm not going to make the mixolydian the 1 because that messes up, that makes it too confusing. We're just going to say, no, the mixolydian is still the 5. It's just that that's going to be the lowest note in the collection of notes. When I get to the Ionian, it is no longer lower in pitch. It's the same note, but it's higher in pitch because we're playing from the perspective of the 5, and that's what this range should be, 12 notes up from the lowest note in the collection of notes that we're working on. Okay, and then we're going to go down here and do this again. And people might say, well, that's harder for people to understand. It's only harder for people to understand if you've learned sheet music your whole life, right? What you want to market to is the people that haven't learned sheet music their whole life, or kids that are trying to learn it in an intuitive way, right? You got a ton of people working on a DAW system that don't understand the piano. You're teaching them. Why would you teach them all the problems that kind of come up with a piano if they're not actually playing on a piano, right? You want to. So if you got these guys that are just kind of putting their beats together and whatnot, this is a lot easier to learn, and it makes perfect logical sense, right? That's the point. All right, so then we're going to go down and we could do the same thing to the Aeolian and put this down here, right-click and paste formulas only, paste formulas only, paste formulas only, paste formulas only, paste formulas only. So now we're going to say that we're in the Aeolian, which is the minor scale. So now I'm on the minor. And so again, if I'm looking at the same collection of notes now, but I'm saying, look, I'm looking at this, the way I would like to say it is I'm looking at the collection of notes around C major, but I'm then going to make the tonic the related 6 or the minor. I'm going to have the minor mode. You could say that you're in A minor, but again, the problem is that sometimes it's easier to name the collection of notes from the perspective of the major. Either way, if someone says I'm in the minor, I'm in A minor, okay, so now we can be in A minor, or you can say I'm in any minor. I'm just looking at the perspective of the modal tonic being the 6. Now again, if you're playing jazz or something in a DAW, which I don't think a lot of people do that are using the basic stuff, right? But you could, in theory, say, look, I'm looking at the same collection of notes, which are the same collection of notes around the C major, but the first part of the song has these tonic or center point of the 6 Aeolian, and another part of the song has the center point or tonic of the Mixolydian. So again, I should be able to break out my sheet music and say, look, this part of the song, I'm focusing in on the center point of the Aeolian versus the Ionian or the Mixolydian. You might say, why does that matter? It might not matter if you're in the same octave, but if you wanted to switch the lowest point of the octave, you can assign each piece of the song a modal perspective. And that, how cool would that be, that then you can rotate each piece of the song through all 12 collections of 7 notes in that modal perspective, or rotate it through all the modal perspectives, adjusting the lowest point or adjusting the tonic as you do that rotation. So you could adjust the whole song then relative through all the modal perspectives, or through all 12 relative perspectives, or you can adjust each piece of the song that you have given a different collection of notes or different modal perspective to. If you were allowed to do that, then again, the level of tinkering you're able to do in a DAW would go up huge, right? That would be like you'd be able to just play with it with all the normal variations of a song as you would normally think of them from a musical standpoint, or just a logical standpoint from the way Western music is built. All right, so then let's copy this down to finally the Locrian. Wait a sec. Yeah, to the Locrian. And we'll paste formulas here, paste formulas here, paste formulas here, paste formulas here, paste formulas here. All right, so then now we can transpose it to the Locrian mode, and it would be, and the B would now be the lowest note. So that means, so that's going to be it, basically. That's the general idea. Someone needs to map this out in a DAW and MIDI system, is my point. So and I think that we should be teaching people how to write music from a relative position, so they don't have to rewrite it when they transpose it. We should be seeing everything from the standpoint, at least one standpoint we should see it from, is the Nashville number system, relative positions, not limiting us to 5 notes, but looking at it from that perspective so that we can imagine the dial being changed. We can imagine how the music system works, how it rotates through all 12 collections of notes, and we can start, it'll be easier to transpose things and basically manipulate things in our mind, because that seems to me the way the system's kind of built. And the DAW system, if it reflected that, as well as a MIDI system, would give you a way larger ability for normal tinkering within the context of normal music construction as it's designed to be done, it seems to me, in Western music, which can be condensed here and then expanded here. Everything from this on this worksheet is from the perspective of this key from the Ionian mode, but in a DAW system, they should all be connected in such a way that you can write the song in whatever format you want, and you should be able to rotate it. I think this proves that it's doable to rotate it through all of these different perspectives as we link the tables together. All right,